Good morning everyone, luccaonthego here, and a few weeks ago I posted a video of an unboxing I did of this camera right here, the Canon EOS Rebel SL3. So today I'm gonna do a video review of it. So this is the Canon EOS Rebel SL3. It's a beginner camera. It's usually indicated for people that want to transition from phone photography to their first DSLR camera. I currently have the 18-55mm lens mounted, and it's not a zoom lens or a wide lens, but it's kind of in the middle. So it's a standard lens that comes with the kit. This camera can shoot up to 4K at 24 frames per second, but it also shoots at Full HD at 30 and 60 frames per second, and also standard HD at 60 frames per second. So this camera gives you the options of choosing between manual focus and autofocus. You have the option here. And you also have a stabilizer in this lens, which is very useful, especially when you're using a zoom lens, which is not this one. But when you zoom in, it's like if you have a shaky image, it gets very visible. So the stabilizer is a good feature. And another important aspect of this camera is that it can shoot photos in RAW, which is better if you're gonna be editing them in Photoshop or Lightroom. Usually RAW files have more details and they're larger files too, but they're much better to handle in post-production than JPEG. And the last feature I want to show before we start getting into the more specifics of the camera is that it has a flip-out LCD screen. And this is very useful if you're a vlogger and you're recording yourself, or if you put the camera on a tripod and just record yourself, because then you can adjust the focus manually and make sure you're still in focus because you can see yourself on the screen. So now I'm filming myself on Full HD on 30 frames per second, and I'm using the autofocus. And if I move my head around, you will realize the autofocus will do a pretty good job focusing on my face. And now I am filming in 4K at 24 frames per second, and you can see that I look a lot closer to the camera, because when filming in 4K, this camera crops a lot into the image, even though I didn't zoom in. Another problem with the 4K in this camera is that if I move my head around, the autofocus will have a harder time focusing on what the subject of the image is. And now we're gonna see the difference of filming with the 18-55mm lens and the 55-250mm lens. I'm gonna put both footage side by side, and you see that when using the 55-250mm, which is a zoom lens, the cars on the street will be much more closer. So here you have the shutter speed. The shutter speed, it's like a wall in the camera that when you click the shutter button, and it's the shutter opening and closing. So it works like a wall to allow the light to come into the camera. So a quicker shutter speed allows you to slow down movements, and it's indicated if you want to take a photo of someone practicing sports, if you want to take a photo of animals running, while a slower shutter speed allows you to have that blurry effect on waterfalls, and also if you want to take photos that you can see the trail of lights of the cars or like the city, you can also use slower shutter speeds for that. So next to shutter speed, you have aperture, which is signaled with an F in front of it. The aperture allows you to control the depth of your image, and they are a function of F. So F divided by X. So an F divided by 4 aperture is larger than a F divided by 11. If I want to isolate the subject of the image to the background, I will use a larger aperture, and therefore this lens allows you to start with an aperture of 4. So an aperture of 4 would mean that the background is blurrier than if I used an aperture of 11. Finally, the last thing here is the ISO. The higher the ISO, the easier will be for the camera to capture images in low light conditions. The problem with that is that if you set the ISO too high, you will start to see a lot of noise in your image, and they will show up as the form of grains. So this was my review of the Canon EOS Rebel SL3. It is a very good camera and a very affordable one, especially, like I said, if you're transitioning from mobile photography to your first DSLR camera. This camera can handle pretty much everything very well. One thing I want to make it clear is that everything in this video was shot on manual mode. You can choose to shoot on auto mode if you want to. The camera will do all the calculations for you. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't come out as good as it would if it was in manual mode, but it's up to you to decide. If you really want to learn photography, I would highly recommend you to shoot on manual mode, because then you can learn about ISO, aperture, shutter speed, and you can set your own parameters. So overall, I think it's a great camera. I think if you do most of your work in 1080p for videos, it will handle just fine. I wouldn't recommend it if you shoot a lot in 4K, because despite having the capabilities to shoot in 4K, like I said before, the autofocus does a lousy job focusing on the actual subject, and the sensor crops a lot into the image. So I wouldn't recommend it for those situations. But if most of your work is done in 1080p, like for YouTube, Instagram, and that kind of stuff, TikTok, it's fine. It will handle just fine. The battery life is fine. I never had any problems with it. Like I've done photo shoots of 2 hours and I never ran out of battery. If you are shooting in 4K, you will run out of battery quicker than if you're shooting in 1080p. But I don't think that's a problem. Maybe buy like an extra battery, have 2 fully charged, and then you never have this problem. So if you like this video, make sure to leave a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel. I also recently launched a YouTube Shorts channel, so make sure to check that out too. If you want to follow me on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, I'll leave the handle here. It's at luccaonthego, Lucca with 2 C's, and I'll see you next week.